So I'd like to welcome back David Holmes, who's the owner and chairman of the Ashcroft Group. David, we last spoke around 3 weeks ago, and you argued that the social care sector had performed well during the COVID-19 epidemic. Do you still hold this view?
Well, I do hold the view that the social care sector has continued to perform very well. And clearly, as when we spoke last time, we need to be very conscious of the fact that many thousands of people have died in care settings, and to be really respectful of that. And I don't want anything that I say to detract from that in any way. But I don't think that the number of deaths is necessarily a good measure of performance. And I think that the current position in the UK, which is where we have, I think the recent statistics are that COVID has been in 38% of care homes in the UK. I think at this point in the cycle, that's not a bad place to be. I think in comparison with some countries internationally, that still stacks up very well. I was talking to a colleague in Canada over the weekend who was telling me that in Canada, 80% of deaths have been in care homes, and so we're not in that territory at all. And at this point in time, I think actually COVID is in very few care homes, and most care settings are operating very effectively and COVID-free, and they're supporting people to stay well and happy. And so how have they done that? Well, I think we've kept things tight. I think we recognise that this ain't over yet. So we've been continuing to support our staff. We've absolutely avoided complacency. We've embraced the things that have come to the fore in recent weeks, like the testing regime, both for our staff and where it's appropriate for the people that we support. And I think we're being really cautious about the way that we relax lockdown. So yeah, I think the care sector has continued to perform very well. I'm very proud of the way that it's worked through this epidemic.
Thank you. And looking forward, how do you view the ongoing risks that are facing Ashcroft and the people you support?
Well, it's an important question. So there have, over the recent weeks, been a number of press conferences, government press conferences, where they've been announcing various aspects of release of lockdown. We've seen the pictures on the television of people on beaches, and it's a worrying time. If I think about it from Ashcroft's perspective, we have just come through the first wave. So social care has struggled with some aspects of this epidemic. I think it wasn't supported well at the outset. More latterly, it has received some support, and organisations have adopted their own strategies to come through it. At Ashcroft, I think we've come through well. We've had 2 cases amongst the 160 people that we support, and those people are thankfully well. We've had about a dozen cases amongst our staff team, and currently I think we have one person who has a positive diagnosis, and she's on the mend, so that's a really positive thing. And so I'm really grateful and thankful for where we are. I know that that's due to a lot of hard work and a good dose of good fortune as well. But clearly now the people that we support are looking to access the community. Families are looking to visit our services, and indeed to have people that we support visit them too. And our staff are inevitably out there in the community. They want to see their families and friends just like the rest of us, and that's entirely understandable. And so the approach that we adopt actually is a continuation of the approach that we've adopted all the way through. Very central to that is supporting our staff to stay safe. And our staff have been absolutely brilliant. So our staff absolutely get the message that by keeping themselves safe, they will keep the people that we support safe. They absolutely understand that. And they've been wholly responsible in the way that they have lived their personal lives. They've been really taking care to make sure that they don't get COVID. So that's really important. I think the other thing that I place great importance on is the testing regime. So at Ashcroft, we have, for the last month now, been testing all our staff every week, and that's a huge commitment, isn't it? For our staff, that means that means they go through that difficult process of testing every week, and it's not a pleasant thing to go through. And we're asking a lot of them by requesting that they do that, and they've all done it, and I'm hugely grateful that they've done it, because that's a big part of our defence. That process has identified 4 staff who are either asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic, and we caught them early and isolated them early, and that's kept COVID out of 4 services, in my view. And that's quite a remarkable thing. So the statistics I was giving you earlier, the very, very positive statistics about COVID and people we support at Ashcroft, I don't think I would be giving you those statistics if it wasn't for our really comprehensive testing regime at this point in time. The third thing I would say is about messaging. So the government has relaxed its messaging. It's moved to this stay alert position. It's become more ambiguous. At Ashcroft, we've kept our messaging really tight, and our messaging is that people are safer at home, and that when we're moving away from that position, when we're relaxing lockdown, we'll only be doing so in a really slow and carefully considered and incremental way. So I'm really pleased about everything that Ashcroft's done to this point. I think we have to keep really careful. We have to stay cautious, and we have to, more than anything, we have to stay on our game, because we can't allow complacency to creep in. So we are worried, but we're also very well prepared. And if any organisation is going to do it, if any team of staff is going to do it, it's going to be our team.
That's brilliant, thank you. And finally, the government has introduced an infection control grant for social care. Do you think this is helpful?
Well, it's an opportune question, this, because today actually is the day that Surrey County Council is sending out letters and indeed starting to distribute the money that we get from the infection control grant. I will just talk about the grant in case people aren't aware of it. So the government initially gave, in 2 tranches, gave £3.2 billion to local authorities, in part to support the social care sector. Actually, most of that money went on other aspects of local authority expenditure. But that's now been followed by this £600 million that the government has distributed or is distributing as grant funding to local authorities. And actually, most of that money gets passported straight through to registered providers. And at first glance, you would think that was a really fantastic thing. That's new money coming into social care. We've been fighting for years for new money to come into social care, and all of a sudden we're giving 600 million. Fantastic. Not quite so good, actually. So better than nothing, not quite so good. And the problem it's not quite so good is that it's come with a number of issues. So firstly, there are some really tight controls, right? Tight conditions about what we can spend that money on. And that's unfortunate. The second is that some of those conditions relate to items of expenditure which good providers will have already spent money on. So for example, it's encouraging providers to cohort their services so that each of their services stands like a little island, so there's no people working between services, so there's no agency staff working between services. And actually, good providers, and clearly I would see Ashcroft in that category, we were doing that 2 or 3 months ago. Another example would be that this money is to support people not to have to travel on public transport. And again, that's something that we were encouraging 2 or 3 months ago by giving people pool cars to drive to work instead of having to catch the bus. So, and you're not allowed to apply any of this funding retrospectively, so that's unfortunate. One of the things this money is for is to ensure that we can pay staff in full when they're away from work because they're isolating. And that's problematic because we haven't done that to this point because we're not funded to do it, and beyond this grant we won't be able to afford to do it either. So there's a point about unfairness, and that's a bit unfortunate. And finally, I would say it's been a real distraction. So every meeting I go to at the moment with colleagues across the sector seems to be about this £600 million grant, and it begs the question for me as to what we would have been talking about had we not had this money to spend. So I think that the grant could have been used better. I think if the conditions had been less restrictive, I think we might have been able to secure better value from it. So it would have been good to be able to spend some of it on PPE, which is an obvious thing for me in terms of infection control. It would have been good to spend it on training. It would have been good to spend it on deep cleaning houses and things like that. It would have been good to take a broader view of what it takes to keep staff safe. It's not just about travelling on buses, actually. It's about a whole broad aspect of how people live their lives and where they're shopping, who they're mixing with, etc., etc. And also we're moving to the point where visitors will be coming to our services. So it would have been good to spend the money on visitor arrangements and how we can structure that to take place in a safe and controlled way. So my conclusion is that I'm pleased we've got the money. Any money is better than none. It would have been good if it didn't come with quite so many strings attached.
That's brilliant. David, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Nikki.